Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the UNEP FI Global Roundtable. This is the session on how to address social risk through finance. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Joana Pedro. I'm leading the social and human rights thematic area at UNEP FI, and I'll be moderating this session today. So I'm very pleased to be joined in this session by two of the founding members of our Principles of Responsible Banking, the PRB. So we have with us Celina, who is the president from Banco Hipotecario in El Salvador. So very welcome, Celina. We also have Amanda, that is the human rights lead at ENG in the Netherlands. So also welcome, Amanda. And then we also have joining us Elin, who is with the Danish Institute of Human Rights, and will also help us in this session to clarify what are the roles and responsibilities on banks in this context. So thank you so much, the three of you, for having accepted this invite and for being with us today. So it's very, very good to have you all here. I think the four of us, because we are here as well, we all believe that banks can contribute and can actually and should actually have an active role on the achievement of the 2030 agenda and on the development and the need to promote human rights in the long term. So my first question would actually be for the three of you, and it would be some from your perspectives and from coming from different banks and also from a Human Rights Institute. Why do you think that banks indeed have that role? And also very bluntly, like, why do banks should care about the impacts that they have on the people and on society? So I would start maybe with Celina, if you can speak a bit on that. Thank you, Celina.
Thanks, Joana, and thank you for the invite. Glad to be here in representing the PRB, Central America, El Salvador, and of course, Banco Hipotecario. So in regards to your question, the Sustainable Development Goals are, as you all know, universal call for action to end poverty, to protect the planet, and improve the lives and prospects of everyone, everywhere. We are in the middle right now of the plan of 15 years, still 7 to 8 years to go and to achieve the goals of the 2030 agenda, which is a compromise, I believe, from everybody to everybody. It is an effort and action from governments, cities, local authorities, civil society, private sector, and individuals. In fact, remembering, I think it was 1 or 2 years ago when the Secretary General called for the decade for action, from government action, local action, and people action. So specifically answering your question, why do I think that banks should have a role in the 2030 agenda and why should banks care? I would start by saying this in take it as a parenthesis right now, which I will go back to it as I'm talking. So without trying to copy the UN in such a strong statement made back in 2015 with all UN members, Banco Hipotecario is a state-owned bank in El Salvador. So it is within the top 5 biggest banks in the country. And in early 2020, it changed its mission of doing its business and focused on being a driver change for each person and being able to help each to prosper. Why? Because we want to focus on those people that are excluded from financial access, to focus on helping all, leaving no one behind. So having said that, banks in general of any financial system are tremendously necessary and important actors as a driver force of the economies of the countries in which they operate, supporting or financing all types of businesses, from micro, small, medium, and corporate enterprises, generating employment through the working capital that banks can loan. Depending on the region where each is, each bank can be measured from low to high and how it impacts its country. For example, Banco Hipotecario is helping the economy of El Salvador, a country you can say it's relatively small. It has a population of less than 7 million people. But the SDGs, as I said in my introduction, is work from all to all. In our case, Banco Hipotecario, we feel really special because I believe that being that we are a state-owned bank, we are in the line with the public policies of our president and our government in making this country a better country and focusing on the social and on the most vulnerable people, despite making a priority an economic profit. That differentiates us from the private banks. We are truly committed in achieving and therefore doing with actions what we can do and where we can do it, like fighting poverty, reaching and educating people in rural areas so we can combat exclusions, having special products for women, among others. As Banco Hipotecario, we strongly believe that by mobilizing financing for the placement of productive loans, we promote the development of health, food, basic services, housing, and security for our population. And this financing is channeled into more jobs, the development of our rural areas, of our communities and municipalities. We are trying to achieve equality for all people to have the same access to financial products in accordance with their different needs. Banco Hipotecario, and you'll see me repeating this because probably it's like the thing that differentiates Banco Hipotecario from the rest of the banks, is that it's state-owned. It makes impact through an interinstitutional collaboration with the central government, all other government institutions, including ministries over here, and municipalities also, to support especially social projects that will bring resources for the country's or municipalities' development that we still have a long way to go to improve people's quality of life. And therefore, Banco Hipotecario in this way is making its part in helping such development for more sustainable and equitable cities. And I'm saying cities right now, but mostly in El Salvador, it's communities in rural areas. So here you can see the work of Banco Hipotecario that we're actioning towards the SDGs. And right now I can name 9, SDG 9 and 11, in what refers to the support and financing of infrastructure projects, as well as target 11 in providing tools for the mayors of the municipalities to bring more efficient services to the people. So if you bring this to real data, the bank's attention to provide loans for the productive sector, as of July of this year, just an example, translated to the creation or sustainability of more than 104,000 households. In our small country, given the people that still don't have access to banks, this means a lot. Another example of how Banco Hipotecario collaborates is that we bring a direct impact through education in money management and the use of financial products, the basic ones. And over here, we tackle goals 4 and 10, quality of education and reduction of inequalities. What I'm trying to prove here and summarizing everything is that Banco Hipotecario, because of its mission and because of the way it does banking, cares and definitely should, and is being part of the 2030 agenda plan in order to tackle poverty and making its best efforts to empower our low-income population through financial education and inclusion. We are a bank completely committed to achieve the SDG goals by 2030, and we are also proud to be a part of the principles of responsible banking. In that sense, that I have explained what Banco Hipotecario does and impacts, other banks in their countries and their regions should be doing the same. And therefore, definitely, banks need to commit and work towards the impact of people and society in the way they do their business. Thank you.
Thank you, Celina. It's very inspiring to hear. Thank you so much. Amanda, maybe if you can, from your perspective, from ING perspective, also give your contribute.
Sure. Thanks, Joana, for inviting me. Very happy to be part of this panel today. As a bank, it is our responsibility to do business without harming people. When we consider our impacts, they are on different levels. It starts with our own workplace as an employer, when we procure services, but also how we do business and who we do business with. In order to mitigate these impacts, we created the environmental social risk team at ING about 20 years ago, and we started joining other initiatives and commitments. For example, we were the first bank to adopt the equity principles when we were to provide project finance. The environmental social risk framework was created about 15 years ago, ensuring that each transaction and clients are compliant with our policy, limiting any negative impacts from our business or from our clients. We embedded the OECD guidelines and the United Nations guiding principles on responsible business as a form of basis to our ESR framework. Still touching on our policy, a dedicated human rights policy, which is fundamental and overarching, covers sectors that are not covered under specific sector policies in our ESR framework. That helps on the due diligence process and to make sure that transactions and clients, they have basic human rights commitments applied to every engagement that we do. Back in 2016, we signed the Dutch banking sector agreement on international responsible business conduct regarding human rights. This was a multi-stakeholder platform in order to have a constructive engagement with peers, other banks in the Netherlands, NGOs, trade unions, and the Dutch government on the topic of human rights. There were studies on value chains like gold, cocoa, and palm oil in order to understand the role of banks in the value chain. And one of the main deliverables was a report under the UNGP's reporting framework. This is when we started to identify ING's human rights saliencies. We started for wholesale banking and in our own operations. Since this work started and the publication was back in 2018, we continued to focus the efforts to monitor our saliencies via proactive engagements with clients and also via policies when carrying out due diligence and also on transaction and when onboarding client. Our most recent report, we did an assessment of our retail operations on focusing on individual customers to understand what would be the most severe human rights issues, the human rights saliencies for individual customers. But it's a never-ending work. We are trying to be creative and innovative when we are monitoring human rights saliencies, developing tools using adverse media and external databases to prioritize focus and where we should focus our engagement. I see that it's a continuous work. It's very dynamic, but we recognize that we play a role and we need to make sure that we mitigate our impacts.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It's very nice to hear also the work that you're doing and the specific team also that you have within the bank. So then, Elin, if you can also from now the perspective of Human Rights Institute, it would also be very good to hear again, why do you think that banks should and have to have this role in society?
Many thanks, Joana, for inviting us to give some remarks around this very important topic of banks and human rights. I mean, starting with the obvious, banks have a critical role in our economies, providing financial services to individuals, to companies, and as such, they can play a key role in directing finance towards sustainable development and responsible business, including through all the different financial services that you provide. And of course, I'm not a banking expert. I work on human rights. But I think, also looking at the impacts that banks can have on a range of human rights, both through their own activities and their business relationships, it is very important that banks take that responsibility very seriously. Let me just give you some examples. You mentioned, Amanda, an exercise around your retail operations, and indeed we know that there could be instances, for example, of discriminations against certain group in access to credit. We have all heard about irresponsible lending leading to people losing, their homes. But also, if you look at the other side of your clientele with corporates, I mean, through advisory services to companies, corporate loans, project finance, and other financial services, banks might be providing critical support to companies that are actually engaged in human rights abuses or environmental harm. And in recent years, there has been an increased attention to the financial sector's role in relation to human rights. You have probably seen that you've been benchmarked by some civil society organization, that there is increased scrutiny. There's also have been, a number of cases that have been filed in front of national contact points, alleging that banks, because of their financial relationship to a corporate entity, had a responsibility to do something and try to mitigate that harm. What we see now also is that the OECD and the UN have come up with specific guidance to certain actors or activities within this sort of complex financial ecosystem. But the message is very clear that banks need to integrate responsible business conduct throughout their activities. It is also clear from what this international authoritative guidance tells us that integration of responsible business or human rights due diligence process is needed throughout the activities of the bank, that it's not only a sort of one-off process where you screen beforehand a client and rely on the information that they give you, and then this is good enough. And I just wanted maybe to insist a little bit on what human rights due diligence means, because of course the term due diligence is quite familiar to banks. There's a lot of due diligence, but of course human rights due diligence is quite a different thing. As you mentioned, Amanda, you said it's a never-ending work. I would say it's an iterative process where you need to indeed review on a regular basis what the risks might be connected to different types of activities. And that should not be restricted to the screening or the pre-transaction phase. But most importantly, I would say what we really need to understand is that human rights due diligence looks at risk to people and not to risks to the bank or to the client. Of course, sometimes those might match, but the approach is really looking at, might we have a negative impact on people, and what can we do about it? Also, I think, another reason why banks should be taking responsible business and human rights very seriously, apart from the fact that they have these impacts and that there are big expectations being set on them. We're also seeing that, the normative environment is changing these days, as you know, through the regulation on sustainable finance that the EU has adopted. Human rights are included as part of the minimum safeguards. And then also now that the EU is soon adopting a directive on corporate sustainable due diligence, banks will also be expected to conduct human rights due diligence throughout their operations. Lastly, I just also wanted to maybe reflect a little bit on this idea that creating a positive impact and contributing to the sustainable development goals is something else than addressing your impacts. And I do reckon, of course, that as a bank, there's a lot you can do in terms of directing finance towards more vulnerable groups of society. As you mentioned, Celina, the need for banks to look at poverty reduction, support communities in financial literacy, etc. And that I think is very good. But what I wanted to insist on is that identifying and preventing some of the harms that are built in our current business and trading patterns has a real transformative power. So, you know, if you engage with your clients to support efforts to really look at how we can minimize harm to human rights, you are actually making a very important contribution towards an economy that is more respectful of human rights and the environment. So in short, respecting human rights, addressing your impacts will be a critical contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you so much, Elin, and thank you also for this connection between impacts and human rights, and this also this the regulations that are actually changing in the EU, but also in other parts. So I think it's also a good mention. Thank you for that. I think moving forward, one question that I had, it's for both Celina and Amanda, but maybe starting with Celina. One of the things, Celina, and it was very clear in your first question, but also I did notice that in other times when you speak, you always bring this up on the social as so important for Banco Hipotecario. So I think it's really something that you have quite at heart. So I think that's very interesting. It's very very good to hear someone in your position to always come that upfront in speeches. But I'm sure that comes with challenges as well, like even within the institution. So this question now would be like, for what are the challenges that from having social issues such in a high agenda come with, and if you have any examples that you could share of those challenges.
Yes, thanks, Joana. Of course, it's very, sometimes it's very hard to understand what's happening in a small country, far from where you guys are probably. And we are in an emerging market, still a developing country. So that's why sometimes it's very hard to understand how we as banks are trying to make a difference, or at least, well, me right now as in my role. So challenges are a lot. One of them, the biggest one, is that there exists financial exclusion. According to the data that we have, we are the second country in the region with the lowest bank account coverage. Only 35.85% of our population has a bank account with a financial institution. This is big, like only 35%. And in addition, 25% of the micro and small medium enterprises have identified the lack of access to financing as an obstacle to this development. So this is pretty big in our economy. And Banco Hipotecario has taken action since 2019, building strategies to develop and offer our products to this part of the unbanked population, and have also identified that this offer has to come in hand with a guide and explanations of such through financial education so that the population feels confident and secure by using the bank's products. Why? Because the major challenge in this is the culture. Our people, they don't trust institutions, banking. Why? Because of the past. Because that's the poverty that there exists and still exists in El Salvador. So, but then, even though as a bank we have products and services that we're trying to develop, financial exclusion is also affected because banks are only present in important cities. Banks are not present in the rural areas. They don't have cars. People over here in rural areas don't have cars or cheap or free transportation, as probably you see this difference in European countries. So we still face challenges in the information. Although we're doing actions, it is also very necessary to articulate programs with support of municipalities and the government. So what are we doing here is trying to have more agencies present in these rural areas. What have we been doing recently? Since 2021, we have an alliance with correspondent financial accounts. So through supermarkets or through pharmacies, we are offering sometimes of some of the products and services that the bank has. Because financial inclusion, as I said, or financial exclusion is not because of one factor. There are lots of different factors that affect it. Also, another challenge, and this is a reality of our country, is usury. Many financially excluded people and also micro entrepreneurs or enterprises fall into the necessity to ask for capital through loan sharks in order to have liquidity. Loan sharking in El Salvador has been seen as normal among most vulnerable people. And this is the majority of our population. And this is very sad. They charge extremely high interest rates. In our country, there have been some reforms recently with the Congress of this year, because before the unregulated were not regulated under the law of usury that there exists. But now it has given power to regulators to sanction them. At Banco Hipotecario, being a state-owned bank, we are called to support these guidelines from the Presidency of the Republic. And therefore, in accordance with the stipulations of the new reforms of Congress, we have developed a zero usury financing. With it, we want to dignify and support the people that, because of their need, fall in these evil paying interests. Myself and my opinion is that this is an abuse. And as a leader of this bank and having the chance to help is the reason why this financing is being offered in those words by Banco Hipotecario to specifically attack the loan sharking in the country. Another challenge is financial education. The levels of financial education are still low over here, with only 10% in urban areas and 7% in rural areas, which implies a challenge that we seek to meet through strategic alliances to achieve the vulnerable population and provide workshops for kids, for women, and overcome all this misinformation and to empower them with knowledge and to teach them what rights they have. Also, gender inequality is often evidenced by the lack of access to credit products that meet women's needs. In El Salvador, according to Global Findex 2021 data, only 29% of women have a bank account versus 45% of men. In addition, it was found that in turn, many women do not have the opportunity to expand their businesses, to mobilize them and generate income for their families. Based on this gap that we know exists, we have created a special financing, which is called Women Inclusion, aimed at women that work or are in the informal sector of this country So they can use it as working capital, investment consolidation, or payment of debts at a preferential market rate. So having said all that and trying to summarize everything, in the bank, this journey was not easy. Why? Because bankers are bankers, and bankers cannot think outside of the guidelines of bank. So it was really difficult because we didn't have a policy. So we created a policy is specifically a financial inclusion. Also, we needed to bring on board all of the employees within the institution. So what do we say to all employees, or what do employees, all of Banco Hipotecario's employees know, is that helping with these lines of credits, with financial inclusion, with zero usury, we are doing a human action. We are having empathy to be able to help our own people, being socially responsible. So every employee is on board with our new mission and is doing its part. And I'm saying it's doing its part because probably their goals or the volume that they can offer will not represent that much as you can achieve in a corporate credit, for example. So that's why this was a big challenge within the institution. Also, there's the challenge of regulation. But in the past year, well, things have been looking better for the regulation and to be able to overcome usury. So those are like the biggest challenges right now. We as Banco Hipotecario are working towards making everybody believe, the population, to trust financial institutions, to know that the country is making a difference, to know that things are different than in the past, and to have and accompany every opportunity that we have in events with mayors, with other ministries, and to tell them, and also through financial education. We are doing our business in a different way, and those are the challenges that yet we're still trying to overcome. So thank you.
Thank you, Celina, very interesting. Amanda, I would pass it over to you. Phrasing Celina, one thing that she said, that bankers are bankers, and being a human rights specialist within a bank, leading a team on human rights, I think that leaves us also with a good question for you also within ING. What are the challenges that you feel and face?
Yeah. ING is a bank with operations in over 40 countries. So any changes in policy requires training, implementation. It's a challenge that requires time and resources. So if we think that we are changing from a soft law environment with UNGP and the OECD guidelines guiding us to a hard law towards the EU CS DDD, the CS report, the reporting, the Sustainable Reporting Directive as well. We need to be prepared. I recognize some of Elin's comments here in terms of financial health when we are providing our finance to individuals, that we need to make sure that we address potential human rights impacts to our individual customer. This is why we did the assessment of our human rights saliencies for retail customers, make sure how we are dealing with potential discrimination, privacy abuses, financial distress, accessibility. It's a list, right? As Elin said, the monitoring and the tracking of these human rights, of our human rights saliencies, is a challenge. How to make sure that, how to monitor it, to make sure that we are addressing and engaging with our clients to understand what is the actions that they're having to to address those issues. This is why we started the development of this tool using external databases and mapping it with our portfolio to prioritize, because it is a long road, but we need to start with prioritizing and focusing efforts on on risks. As you mentioned, the UNGP's flags is a risk to people. The UNGP's flag risk to people. So we need to know to start focusing on that to understand. The assessing and identification of our saliences was one of the steps in our human rights journey, right? But the work is continuous and dynamic. When we identified our saliences, that was back in 2017, 2018. Since then, we are still facing a pandemic. There's a war, several wars in the world. This particular war in Ukraine, they are impacting people's lives in different ways. So how to make sure that we are controlling and we are managing those impacts? And we all know, as Elin said, is okay, we identify the issues, but then is that still correct? So ever since we identify our first human rights saliences, we now get into a process, okay, we need to reassess to make sure that these are the saliences that are in our portfolio, because we may be missing something or they may be still properly identified. So this is where we will start focusing our work now. And if we consider the topic of just transition, it's also high in our agenda. How we transition to a net zero and climate resilient future, considering the potential and actual impacts on vulnerable people. Those that will be and are most affected by this transition in terms of human rights, human development, poverty, and social exclusion. We also need to continue assessing other impacts in our business. It's not only on wholesale banking and retail, but we, as a procurer of services, we also need to understand what are the potential, the most severe human rights issues, our saliences. This is our expectation going forward. As I say, it's a dynamic and changing, and we need to be prepared for what's coming. So we need to be aware and to mitigate our impacts and to not harm people.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. That's very interesting. I think we have not much time left, but I would still want to have also opportunity for Elin to still give from her side what do you feel are the biggest challenges that banks overall and also in this global context that also Celina highlighted, this difference globally, face in order to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
Thank you, Joana. I will try to just make a couple of comments to make it quite short. I think listening to the two of you, what strikes me is that in very different ways and different contexts, your two banks have made significant efforts towards responsible banking, and I think it at least what I hear from you is that it has come from the very top. I think it's very important that we get commitments and attention from senior leadership and boards to make sure that we do take human rights and environmental issues seriously, not only think that this will be solved by having a few ESG advisors, but in order to do that, we need to recognize that responsible business conduct and the UN guiding principles are a relevant framework to banks and not only to real economy companies. And I think we're moving towards that. That's my first point. I think the second one I wanted to make is that it is important to move from seeing the human rights agenda as only a sort of screening out mechanism, but also use the human rights lens proactively in dialogues with clients, and also in looking at financial decisions as ways to strengthen human rights protection, for example, when financing essential service companies, financing business owners from vulnerable groups. So it is also about a sort of positive agenda. I would like to maybe emphasize one more challenge and then a couple of suggestions. Another challenge I think that banks will have to tackle will be how to engage with stakeholders. And this will be, you know, a difficult one because of course you are, when it's not your direct clients you're engaging with, it will be more difficult. But I think this is a very important point. If we want to do a due diligence in a good way, we need to understand the perspective of those who might be affected. In terms of suggestions for the future, if I may, Joana, I think we heard briefly about this collective agreement that a number of stakeholders signed in the Netherlands. I think it is an interesting model that maybe could be looked at in other jurisdictions, so that you know, banks and other stakeholders can come together in a dialogue to address these impacts. Then I think there is a lot that has been happening in recent years in the institutional investors realm, and maybe that could be, you know, of inspiration, looking at what has been done in this space. And then finally, I think because this is hosted by UNEP FI, I think it would be good to look at how human rights and responsible business requirement can be made more explicit in your guidance documents. How can we use the form that you have with so many members to maybe bring up human rights a little bit more? And I think, you know, this is probably a very good indication of your willingness to step up on human rights. So just wanted to congratulate you for that and encourage you to take it further in the future. Many thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you for the three of you for being here. I think, I mean, as UNEP FI, this is exactly what we want to do. So to put people together in the same table and to have our partners and our members to see how to mainstream social and human rights within finance and to align with the 2030 agenda. So I think it's it was a very, very interesting conversation for me. So thank you so much for being here and for giving a bit of your time and of your experience from these different perspectives, different global parts. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Joana.